Today's episode of the Spring Hills Podcast, Barney Cargile joins me in the green room. Barney's a local pastor and author, and today we're going to be looking into a few of his books, Thriving in Quarantine and Thriving in Troubled Times. He's a talented storyteller. I can't wait for you to hear about these books. So here he is, Barney Cargile. Barney, welcome. It's great to have you here. I'm excited to talk about this book and to hear more about you, because I know you a little bit, but I don't know you too personally. I know you from the pastor's prayer meetings, and you've spoken at our church a few times, but I want to get to know you a tiny bit. So let's just start with this. Give us some background on you. Where'd you grow up? What was your upbringing like?
Well, mostly in Seattle. The first 14 years of my life, I lived in South Carolina and then Seattle and went to Bible school there. And been a pastor, I'm 67 now, been a pastor for over 40 years, up and down, mostly the West Coast, Idaho, Oregon, and been here in Santa Rosa, California for 30 years. It's amazing. And served as
Seattle, are you a Seattle sports fan?
Unfortunately, I say that
so
to the Bay Area.
Supersonics is like a heartbreak for you.
Well, yeah, but a Seahawks fan.
Yeah, they had
the
some
Seahawks
good,
and all the 49ers
too.
All the 49ers fans just turn the station off. But it's
anytime
okay.
I meet somebody that's a Seahawks fan, I'm like, I need to know that you've got some tie to Seattle, because if you're just a Seahawks fan because they got really good over the last 10 years, then that's not cool. But
it's lame.
Yeah, it's lame. It's lame. Although I have some weird sports allegiances. I can explain them all, but I've got some weird sports allegiances. I'm actually an Orlando Magic fan.
Oh.
Which there's no bandwagoning for the Orlando Magic.
Except Disney World.
I guess. Yeah. So yeah, you grew up in Seattle. Sounds like you've been all over the West Coast, South Carolina, you said too, right?
Right.
But let's talk about how you became a Christian. Did you grow up in church?
Right. My dad's a pastor, or was a pastor. He's still alive. He's almost 93, but still serves the Lord. And
that's
grew up
awesome.
in a pastor's home. So don't hold that against me. I'm still a good guy.
Hey, I'm pastor's kid. People seem to be okay with me. I think maybe not. Maybe they're just lying to me. So pastor's kid though, what was that? I know growing up for me, I was in the 90s. It was probably a little bit different from when you grew up. I mean, we're 20 years apart, me and you in age?
That's being kind.
So what was it like growing up as a pastor's kid?
It didn't really bother me. It really didn't. I mean, I had a couple years of, kind of semi-rebellion, but for the most part, I really loved the Lord and wanted to follow him. And I felt his call on my life early on to be a pastor, and I kind of resisted it, wanted to go into journalism for a while, but, met my wife, and, she got me right back on the right track.
How'd you guys meet? Linda is your wife, right?
Linda's my wife. We met at church in youth group.
Oh, cool.
I was actually a little old for a youth group. It was sort of like a little blurred. The lines were.
Oh.
She was 17. I was 19.
Oh, okay.
And,
That's 17 and 19. That's fine. If you would have been like, I was 33, she was 15, I would have been like, well, hold on. Let's go back to this.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you guys met at church, and you said you felt the call early on to go into ministry. Was that while you were in high school, college? What was the timeline there?
I don't know if I could say a specific date, but I would say even earlier than that.
Oh,
I
cool.
sensed it. I really sensed it, and just, wanted to be cool. And
Was part of that did you have a good relationship with your dad, and you wanted to follow those footsteps?
That was part of it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I used to always say when I grew up, because again, pastor's kid, my people would say, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I'd always say, "Well, I want to be the worst basketball player in the NBA because I get to pay a lot of money to watch basketball, right?" And then I'd always just end up being, but I'm probably going to end up being a pastor like my dad. And it was always a joke, but it ended up happening. I followed exactly in his footsteps, youth pastor to worship pastor, and it's exactly what I did. So I think it's awesome when you've got pastors that have great relationships with their kids, and it's just like generations of pastors, because their relationship with their kids is so good. I mean, we see that with Brett and Kiki at Spring Hills too. I mean, right. Kiki's now working in ministry and doing an awesome job, and it's a huge testament to the pastors.
Absolutely.
So you've been in ministry now for a long time. You said Santa Rosa for 30 years, but what was your first job in ministry?
I was actually did a year's internship in Spokane, Washington, then was in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho for 10 years. It was almost a church plant, not quite. Came into this small little church, and that was.
What was your role there?
I was the pastor.
Oh, you were the lead pastor.
I was.
How old were you when you took that?
Wow, like 24.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez, that's
and
young.
I look like I was 15. So
You were a young
and right away
24-year-old.
I started teaching about parenting without any kids. So
Nice.
that went
Nice.
over well.
I was in youth ministry. I started at 19 and did my first sermon not long after that when I was 19 years old. And I actually had a couple people get up and walk out because I was at an old school church. They were a little bit like, I mean, I had tattoos. I'm 19 years old and I'm preaching, and they're just like, nope, this is, what do you have to teach me kind of thing, right? Always an interesting experience like that.
Yes.
So now you've been in ministry for a long time. I know you're working with Crossing the Jordan now. You're semi-retired, you say, right?
Right.
So what's the semi-retired? What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm on staff at Santa Rosa Christian Church.
Okay.
And so part-time there, preach about once a month there. And I actually get to preach around the area, filling in a lot because after 30 years, have a lot of relationships with other pastors and churches. And so, at least once a month, I'm in other churches. I've spoken here a number of times at Spring Hills and just love it. Love you guys.
But you're working with Crossing the Jordan as well, right?
I was. Crossing the Jordan is, they dissolved because of, financial,
the COVID
stuff. And they have, some of the graduates have formed a new nonprofit called Intrepid, and I do stay connected. They always consider me their pastor.
Oh, so, that's cool.
Yeah, do Bible studies with them and so forth. Yeah.
Now, your role with Crossing the Jordan, when they were around, you had worked with quite a few people. You mentioned it in your book as well. I should say that we've set this up to talk about your book that you wrote, Thriving in Quarantine. So that's where we're going to lead into here. But
and actually, I have two books.
I'll
plug the other one. Yeah. Well, you probably will get to that in a minute.
I will. Yeah. But if you want to talk about that one too, because you have Thriving in Quarantine is one of the books. The other one is a devotional book that you had kind of putting together while you were also on the cruise. Is that right? Right.
I do a weekly blog called Barney's Bullet. And you can get that. Originally, it was I know it's not politically correct. It was Barney's Bullet Points. And so I kind of, backed away from that. And anyway, so I took a lot of the articles, put them together, and they're inspiring. The purpose is to really build people's hope right now.
Right.
And so it's kind of a companion book to Thriving in Quarantine. The subtitle is Meeting God in the Middle of Our Mess. And we are in a mess, culturally, individually, and so forth. And one of the things I really see, I don't want to take off too much on this, but one of the things is there's just people need hope right now, hope and encouragement. And I see so many people that, are just discouraged. Statistics show that suicides are up, divorce is up, mental illness is up. I mean, all kinds of issues. Substance abuse. And so, I think a lot of people are desperate. And I do believe that both these books offer hope. They're different. Totally different, but
Okay, awesome. Well, let's get into the book a little bit. You start by telling us, first of all, you're writing. Have you always been a writer, or is this something that you thought of later on in life?
No, I've always loved writing.
Because you said journalism. I didn't know about that, but you said journalism. And I'm like, okay, so this has always been a passion of yours.
Right. I mean, even as a young kid, I started writing when I was about 6 years old. Right. Obviously, the quality was on a 6-year-old level, but I just love doing it.
So you wrote this book when you were 6 years old, is what you're saying? No, I'm just kidding.
Sounds like it.
You're a great storyteller. When did you realize that you had a knack for that?
Probably in high school. Taking creative writing courses, and I got a lot of positive feedback on some of my stuff, and the teachers would read it and start laughing out loud.
Yeah.
I thought, well, okay.
Well, you've got a knack for it. So you start out your book explaining how first of all, the cruise came about, right? But you have this way of describing when your daughter was walking to your house, you playing Sherlock, right? Trying to figure out who it is. And it wasn't one of the kids because the footsteps weren't quiet enough or whatever. And you just describe this whole thing in a really creative way. Is that something that comes to you just naturally as you're writing, or do you have to work through that process?
It comes pretty naturally, actually. I come back and tweak it a little bit here and there, but mostly naturally, yeah.
So we do, you talk about your family a little bit. So your wife, Linda, your daughter is Tiffany, her husband, Scott, and then you've got another son, right?
I do have another son, Josh.
And you have the two kids?
Right.
So how many grandkids do you have?
7.
7 grandkids.
7 grandkids.
All right. That's a lot of grandkids. Good for you.
We're richly blessed.
Yes, that's awesome. Let's talk about this book, though. When you're okay, this is kind of a tricky situation because I can't imagine the idea that you're like, well, I'm going to look at this in a humorous way, because it's not a humorous thing, But I read some of the reviews and stuff as well, just on Amazon, and people saying like finding the perspective of one family's perspective on this whole deal, while it's a global panic. So how did you find the balance in that? Was that something that you struggled finding?
Well, I don't think so, but just backing up just a little bit, I want to make sure all the listeners know that what we're talking about is the Grand Princess that sailed out of San Francisco. This was like a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, and that's when kind of we were first, as Americans, first really exposed to COVID. It was called coronavirus back then, if you remember.
Yep.
And so, we had booked this cruise. Like you said, my daughter kind of twisted our arms to do it because it was her 40th birthday and their 10th anniversary, and they needed some designated babysitters to go along with them. So we did that. We went with them, and that's when COVID was found on board. They had the 3 little kids, and they had an inside cabin. We were right across from them. We had a balcony, and boy, it would have been absolutely torturous for them because we were confined to our cabins for 6 days, and then Travis Air Force Base after that for 2 weeks. But
were you able to hang out with them? You weren't completely quarantined between the family, right? You could hang out with your family.
Not at Travis. Not once we got to Travis. They were in a family section, but by that point, 6 days cooped up together. Yeah, we were able to hang out. They let us go back and forth.
Oh, good. Okay.
But we were ready for the break by then.
Sure.
But I forgot your original question. So, about the balance.
Well, yeah. I mean, with this will kind of come too, but the balance between being, you talked about your daughter twisting your arm a little bit to go on this cruise. You really found a good balance also of what it's like to be a grandparent. Now, I'm obviously not a grandparent. I am a parent. But my parents, there's times where my parents, they're going to be willing to watch our kids. And even though they're loving spending time with their grandkids, they can only take a certain amount of it before they're like, you got to come pick the kids up, that kind of thing. So, how has being a parent and now a grandparent helped you grow as a writer?
It gives me a lot of content to draw from. That's
because it's funny, right? There's a lot of humorous things there.
It is. There are. Yeah, absolutely. And, because I focused on our specific family situation, I think it made it easier for me to, kind of find humor in that. I didn't, obviously would never, find humor in the fact that people were sick and dying. We never saw anyone, a sick person on the boat or at Travis. There were people that got sick, but we just,
you weren't around it.
We weren't around it.
Yeah.
And so, it was that we were able to kind of just, have a little fun with our adventure. And I think that's something that people need, especially when the book came out. It's like, wow, this is all gloomy and, so forth. But
yeah. I mean, everything, I think, so if we're thinking back from a little over a year ago now, I guess, that first few weeks of the unknown, I was just first of all, the vast differences between people. Some people were very scared. Other people were the total opposite of that, being like, this is a hoax.
Right.
And even that was just kind of like, man, what is the unknown is kind of my point. And with the unknown being you're on a cruise ship, what kind of unknowns were there for you guys? Because you probably weren't getting all information, or you were getting maybe too much information. I don't know.
Well, the interesting thing is we got more information from the news than we did from our captain.
Okay.
I think that's just sort of how our culture works,
right.
But, we just, there was some concern. There was some fear that came up for us a little bit initially. And, one of the things that we learned, and I bring that out in the book, is that it really taught us to trust God, because we didn't know, even on a personal level, how long are we going to be quarantined in our room? How long before, where are we going to go? They didn't tell us a lot of that. They didn't know initially. And so, where are we going to dock? Where are we going to stay? Are we going to be able to be together? I didn't even know if my wife and I were going to be able to be together for a couple of weeks. And so, but it all worked out. But in the meantime, we just had to learn to kind of stay in the moment and go, okay, I'm not going to freak out about the future, not going to future trip. I'm not going to, because what begins to happen is we create worst case scenarios in our mind.
Snowball.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's true in every aspect of life, but I think we especially had to learn it here.
Were you in contact with anybody on the mainland that that could tell you this is what's happening here in California?
Yeah, we could, but they didn't know anything either.
Right.
So.
It was, I mean, so the timeline here, remind me what the timeline was, because you went on the cruise, because you were on a 15-day cruise, right?
Right. It was the end of February, and we ended up, we went into quarantine. I think it was, I don't know, like maybe the 1st of March.
Okay.
And, or a couple days into March, and we were there, I think, until like March 10th. So we were confined to our room for 6 days, and that was the toughest part.
Yeah.
Just kind of like, okay, what are we going to do next? I mean, it's, all right, and we did variety of activities that kept us entertained.
Right. You also mentioned that you make, first of all, your dad jokes in this, like land ho. You make a joke about if you'd seen land, you'd yell land ho, and you're glad, your wife's probably glad that you didn't embarrass her with that.
I do that quite frequently.
I was going to say, are you the dad joke guy? Like, Dad, I'm hungry. Hi, hungry. Nice to meet you.
Not quite that cornball, but yeah.
Okay. Because then you talk about how you're getting onto an elevator and you're like, you wanted to make the joke. I don't suppose it'd be funny if I started violently coughing, would it?
Right.
So were other people finding humor in this too? Did you see that throughout the ship? Or were you kind of feeling alone on that?
I hadn't thought about it till you asked right now, but I don't guess I saw a lot. I didn't stop to think about it.
Sure.
I was just kind of having fun, and
right.
My humor gets me in trouble at times, especially when I'm preaching, but yeah.
Give me an example. How does your humor get you in trouble?
I when I'm preaching, some of this I can't.
That's fine.
Accidental faux pas that end up being a little unintentionally R-rated.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. So your timeline, you started, you said end of February. So you said March, about the 1st of March, you guys went into the quarantine. What was the timeline of your thinking of, this is no big deal to wait? Is this a big deal? What's going on? Or should we be scared? Should we be panicked? How are we going to be okay?
It sort of grew. At first it was like, all right, so we're here for a couple of days. I can handle a day or two in our cabins, and and then we began to realize, okay, we're going to be here longer than we thought. Maybe this is a bigger deal than we realized. Overall, my wife and I stayed pretty calm. We would tend to be towards the side, especially my wife, on the end of the spectrum that it's being exaggerated. We felt like all the way through, even with our stay at Travis Air Force Base, that the press tended to make a bigger thing over it than what we were actually experiencing.
Okay.
Because they love the doom and gloom stories, but yeah.
Right. Now, you've mentioned to me, and you mentioned already on the podcast already, that the theme here is hope. So when you started to write this, was that originally you're like, man, people need hope right now? Or is that just kind of what came out as you started to write?
I think it came out more or less. I mean,
your devotionals already were
devotionals were geared that way, but I like I said, went back and tweaked them, and the devotional book came out right around Christmas time, just before Christmas. It was interesting. I remember the time I was going to put the devotional book out, and then I was driving, just getting on the freeway on 101 right off College Avenue. I mean, being specific.
And this is like December 2019?
This was about the first book. This was in like around May or something.
Oh, okay.
And I just felt that the Lord was telling me, you need to write this book.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, wow. And I just whipped it out. I mean, it was beyond my abilities as a writer. And it should have taken months and months. Within a couple of months, it was done. And total process, edited, all that.
And when did you actually release it?
It was around the middle of June 20th, something around there.
Wow, so you really did do that super quick.
It was super quick.
Wow,
yeah.
that's awesome. Yeah. So I was going to ask this because the unknown, right?
Right.
Saying we're going to be in our room for a couple days, that's fine. Ended up being, you said 6 days, right?
6 days.
So that's kind of what ended up happening here with the church too, as well, because we were told 2 weeks that we were going to be, shelter in place. And it was, mid-March. So we're thinking, are we going to be able to have Easter services? Well, 4 months later, we're going, oh my goodness, this is still going on. We still haven't had services since this happened. Right. I think we went 13 or 14 weeks here at Spring Hills with no services until we were able to start doing them outside.
Wow.
And everything was just online and stuff. So was there ever a time where you felt hopeless? And I say that as as the church, just knowing like this started to feel hopeless of like, are we ever going to be able to have our church together again? Or anything like that? Did you feel hopeless at all within this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say hopeless, but I remember standing down the balcony just mad and going, this isn't right. Why, how long is this going to go on? What a bummer. I mean, this was supposed to be our vacation, and this is how it goes. And I'm just kind of like moaning and groaning before God. And, I really sensed, from the Lord, it's like, what are you going to do about it? Like, well, nothing. Okay, well, trust me with it.
Right.
And I felt a certain amount of release, at that point. And, it was a discipline to come back to, again, staying in the moment was a really big deal. Mm-hmm. That was super important. So, I did have those kind of moments at times, but yeah, the principles that I talk about in the book really helped.
Did you feel like a prisoner? I mean, I'm not saying. Did you feel like? Did you say that you could you say that you were you really understood what Paul was going through?
Oh, I wouldn't want to go that far. No, but I do think that there was times when it's like I just want to step out and walk down the hall,
and you can't.
Yeah, I mean, no, I couldn't. And,
yeah. So I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't know you super well. I know you well enough to know that you've got a sense of humor about things, and I can't imagine. I'm a little bit of a doomsday kind of person when it comes to not necessarily of the panic of like how serious I think this is, but more of just like well, we're gonna be here forever now. I don't know what we're gonna do, and I just get I snowball pretty hard, pretty quick with those kinds of things. So I can't imagine being stuck in a room and getting a little bit mad and then being able to just surrender it to God and kind of feel that release. I can't relate to that because I feel like I would probably yell at a few people before I got to that
I don't
point.
want you to think it was like I flipped a switch and all of a sudden it's,
Sure.
Rainbows and unicorns and all that, it was, there were those moments, but I do think, when you're kind of stuck like that, it's almost like you have no option. And that sounds bad, but you have no option but to trust God. And it's like, okay, that's a good place to be.
Right. Were you able to see any positives while you were there?
Oh, sure. You mean for us personally or just overall?
Yeah. I mean, for you personally, for just the situation as a whole. I'll give you an example. We do an adventure week every year where we have on campus here, we've got 400 or 500 kids. And when June came around, we realized we're not going to be able to do this on campus, so we're going to have to adjust here. So we did it all online, and it ended up being, granted, we're still really bummed out that we weren't able to be on campus. We realized as we gave these are boxes of activities for the kids to do. So this adventure week's for, kindergarten through 6th grade. And so we delivered these boxes to people. Parents are crying that their kids are going to be able to have something to do, thanking us, that kind of thing, and seeing the fact that the parents – usually, they drop their kids off on campus, they leave, they come back and pick them up. Now, the parents are actually hearing the gospel preached as well by watching these videos with their kids. So we're, finding the silver linings like that of like, you know what? How many parents are hearing the gospel this week because they're actually doing Adventure Week with their kid instead of just dropping them off? So that kind of positive. What kind of positives were you seeing in this situation? Oh,
there were some amazing things. I mean, early on, even before we went on the cruise, because it didn't make sense for us to go in some ways, but Linda and I both sensed that there's some reason we're supposed to be on this cruise, and we didn't really know what it was. We did feel like, when we did interact with people, there were a few days when we found out we might be stuck here before we were actually confined to our quarters. We tried to, really instill messages of hope. One of the things, and we had also opportunities, lots and lots of interviews, interviewed on the San Francisco affiliate, NBC and ABC several times. Was interviewed by KGO Radio Live a couple of times, and it was live, so I was able to talk about Jesus.
Yeah, and they couldn't shut you down.
No, and so, but they came back for a second one, so it was great.
Sweet.
And then interviewed in the newspaper 5 or 6 times, while we were there. So even the Today Show, we did interviews on the Today Show and Good Morning America, but. One of the things, let me just read this to you if I could. It's a quote from Thriving in Quarantine, my first book. And it says, after I talked about the interviews, it says, we couldn't ignore the irony. Here we were, confined to our quarters on the open seas and isolated from other human beings, yet God gave us a far-reaching platform so that we could share his hope and peace, a larger platform than any we had ever experienced in all our ministry. And then I add, God has the best sense of humor in the universe, and he loves to surprise us. In the Old Testament, he spoke through a donkey, for goodness sakes. So I guess he can speak through me. So, and I found that very ironic that we would be stuck out in the middle of nowhere, and we've had more influence probably during that time than any other time in my ministry, which is,
I think that's a great example, too, of just what the church kind of went through, because we're seeing, when we were doing the online stuff, seeing, thousands and thousands of people watching online services, and we're going, you know what, a lot of these people probably wouldn't have been at church today or something, but now they just came across it on Facebook or they came across it on YouTube. And, I think it's the Church Online, like the Craig Rochelle group, that they put together a platform for churches to be able to stream their services live. And it was, I forget the numbers now, but it was just an overwhelming number of people watching services on Easter Sunday, which was so cool because Easter Sunday is already a highly attended week of the year, but just hearing, wow, this is the message of the Gospels getting out in numbers online that we, I couldn't have imagined. And so we started to see God working pretty amazingly through some very frustrating times for us as humans, and just having to be like, oh, no, God doesn't know what he's doing. How many times does that happen? We draw out blueprints. And,
well, Romans 8:28, all things work together for good. So I think that's,
So real quick, I want to know a little bit more about the response that you've had, because we did talk about how, it's a tricky, tightrope to walk here with people being, there's a lot of sensitivity towards the issue, especially if someone has had family members pass away from the coronavirus, and you finding humor through something that you're not finding humor through the coronavirus. You found humor through your experience on this cruise. But have you had any backlash with this, of people feeling like you were making light of a serious situation?
I got on Amazon one negative review. Most of them have been overwhelmingly positive, but this person said, here this guy's a pastor and he shows no compassion for the people that are, here you are, dead bodies floating on the ocean, and you're making, and it's like, okay, buddy, you weren't there. So.
But it's also probably the one that sticks out to you the most, right?
Yeah, that's how it is.
It's
you notice the black spot on the white piece of paper,
Yeah,
but
it stands out.
But I would say overall it's been it's been great.
Yeah.
The response has, and the book's done really well. It was the #1 bestseller on Amazon in 3 categories.
Oh, cool.
And travel, short reads, and stuff like that.
Yeah, it is a short read. That is something that I noticed just when I was thumbing through it. I think I read the first 2 chapters in about 10 minutes. It's not, which actually I think is one of the reviews says it's too short, right?
Yeah. And, when I've thought about that, I thought, probably could have developed the characters a little more. And
I still think you did a great job doing that, because I've never met your family, but I'm like, I understand Tiffany and Scott, and I understand, my wife can get embarrassed by me sometimes. So like, I understand where Linda's coming from, and she's embarrassed that you yell land ho, things like that. So I thought you did a great job with that. I did also see there was one review that wasn't a negative review, but it was somebody saying like, this wasn't our experience, but it's cool to see another perspective of this experience. Someone else that was on the cruise, I think they said, right?
Right. And there was also some reviews that, this really represented our experience. And one person, in fact, said we were on the very same bus you were on that went to Travis. And so, wow, okay.
Have you been in contact with any of the people that you were on cruise with?
Yeah, some. They contacted me, especially, I put it on Facebook about there's a Facebook page for, the Grand Princess relatives and so forth. So I put this on there, and people have responded back. And, a lot of the people that were passengers have read the book.
Cool. And you also mentioned that you met some people on the cruise that were doing a Bible study.
Right.
Did any contact with those people?
Not that I know of. I haven't heard anything back from any of them, and I wish I'd gotten, email.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a bummer. You said you weren't able to join their Bible study that day, but that's really cool that people were doing that on their vacation, on their cruise.
We were very pleasantly surprised. And it's fun. It's fun to you know how it is. You're somewhere and you meet somebody that's part of the body of Christ, and you go, wow, there's boom. Instant connection.
Right. Yeah. And then you also hear, like I've met people in the past where, a guy I bought a guitar from in Nashville, randomly, I just saw it online and I started asking him about it, and I would tell him I'm a worship pastor in California. And he's like, oh, I'm a worship pastor in Nashville.
Oh, wow.
And then we just start talking. We kind of build like sort of a friendship with this guy that's just, that connection of just kind of like, hey, you do the same thing I do. This is cool,
I love it.
Yeah. Anything else you want to share with us about the book that you find really important?
Again, I just think the message in both books, the message of hope in these times, totally different approach. One is, just a story that's, lighthearted, and I think does encourage people. And I think, that's thriving in quarantine. Thriving in troubled times is it's just a day-to-day aspects of life. And if I could, I want to share just a story at the very end of the book. It's a personal story after I've done the 50-day devotional, and it's, again, different aspects. There's 4 different parts to it. I think it's trusting God, gratitude, living in the moment, and I forget what the 4th one is. But at the very end, there's kind of an epilogue where I tell a story about our business here. We have a business in Santa Rosa called the Bird's Nest at Montgomery Village. And so back around May, we were thinking we're not going to be able to make it. We're having to pay rent, all the expenses, but we have to be closed. And so we thought we'd test the waters. We put a few kind of like COVID items in the window, toilet paper and hand sanitizer and so forth. And we thought, let's do it. It's Mother's Day weekend. So it was Friday, and I think we sold like $5 worth of merchandise. The next day we got up and I prayed and said, God, we don't know what, we don't know. It looks like we're going to have to stay closed, and if that's what you want, then okay, but your will be done. And then I prayed kind of a Gideon-type prayer where it's like, God, if you want us to stay open, you need to give us a sign. So we had another terrible day. I turned the lights out. Linda was out in the car, and I was just locking up the door, and I saw this lady out of the corner of my eye running up, and she said, please stay open, stay open. And it's like, okay, we opened back up, and it's like, she went through the store and bought $4,000 worth of merchandise, furniture, everything. And she said, I was redecorating. And I got to tell you, we've been in business all together. We were out in Bodega 2 years and here in Santa Rosa. In 28 years of business, that's the largest single individual sale we've ever had.
Yeah.
If I'd been 30 seconds earlier, locking up, I wouldn't have seen her. And it came on the day when we kind of like prayed that prayer, give us a sign, and God did. He came through. And the weird thing about it is we never saw her again. She left some furniture there she didn't pick up. I called her, I texted her, and so we eventually had to sell it again. So, it was incredible just how quickly God kind of showed us what he wants. So, those kind of encouraging stories, that was our personal one, but they're found in there. And one of my gifts is encouragement, and I think it's really important right now.
And I think you found a good way to encourage people by being relatable, because there's so many people that have had the same struggle with their businesses, whether it's retail or whatever it is. My wife's a photographer, and she's seen, she made over the year of 2020, she made about 15% of what she made the year before. And it's tough. Now we've got a good enough perspective on life to understand, like, it's just money, and we're going to trust God that he's going to continue to provide for us. And you know what? The good thing is she's been able to spend a lot more time with our kids, and, just the good things that have come out of it, rather than, her feeling like, man, I'm just really letting our family down. It's hard to not be working here in this area, just how expensive it is, right? So she was feeling the pressure of it. And over the last year, we've kind of realized, like, working a little bit is really good, but we've figured out how to just, we don't need a bunch of nice things. We just need pay rent on the apartment and be able to buy some groceries, and we don't need to go on the big vacations that we can't afford right now, and we don't need to, and we're good with that. We've got like you said earlier, you're rich with how many grandkids you have, right? Well, we feel rich, even though we don't have a lot of money. We feel rich that we're able to have a home where we can, do puzzles with the kids all day on a Monday, and just that kind of thing, that the perspective changes. And I think you found a good way to relate to people with those kinds of things and being encouraging through, first of all, through humor. I relate with humor. I think it is so important to find the humor in everything. I think you said it great. God has the greatest sense of humor of all. I love that perspective. And it's really cool just to see that. Now, we talked about the response. Now, I want to know, this is my question. Do you have a follow-up to this? Are you working on something already, or are you taking a break from writing?
I do. I have all kinds of ideas. I'm forcing myself to slow down a little bit
Sure.
and try to market these books some, because that's what I don't really like. I love writing, and
Sure.
I think this is very typical, but I write, and I really have to look at my motives closely, and I really, God keeps reminding me that, this is His project, and my motive really is to try to influence people as much as possible. So I'm trying to do that, but I do have another book. I'm going to stay with the thriving theme that I'm working on called It's about our identity in Christ. So I'll probably just go with thriving in our identity, because I believe that is so critical. If we know who we are in Christ, that is going to take us through all kinds of struggles.
And another, you said thriving in our mess is, how's it again?
Thriving in troubled times, meeting God in the middle of our mess.
Middle of our mess. That's how you said it. So yeah, thriving in your identity. I think it's another thing that people are searching for identity, man. People have always been doing that, but we hear so much of it now, searching for some kind of identity, whether they find it in their job, their relationships, their hobbies, whatever it is. But searching for an identity, and it's so important especially for Christians that don't even understand that their identity is in Christ yet.
Right.
They have a relationship with Him, but they haven't gotten to the point where they identify themselves as a child of God. And that's so important for us to understand.
And I think that's one of the biggest areas where Satan attacks us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that too.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Anything else you want to share before we take off here?
You can get these books on Amazon. You can order them on Amazon. Thriving in Quarantine, Thriving in Troubled Times.
Do you have is the Kindle version available?
And the Kindle's available, and the print version. And hopefully there will be I've recorded it. Hopefully the
an audio
version will be available of the Thriving in Quarantine. But yeah, by Barney Cargile, and
And you've got a website. You can also probably find this stuff, right?
Yes, on BarneyCargile.com.
Okay, cool. All right, man. Well, thanks for doing this. I appreciate you sharing about your experience. I appreciate the humor that you find through all of this. I haven't read the whole thing yet. I've read the first half and thumbed through the rest. I'll be reading the rest of that. And you left the devotional book here too, and I've kept it in the green room and thumbed through some of those as well. So I appreciate that, man.
Thank
you. All right, dude.
Thanks,
Thanks
Garett.
for being here.